Hello, Facebook. Um, so, I, uh, I guess I made a provocative post yesterday, and I'm feeling light about it, even though for some people it was offensive, triggering, upsetting. Um, one person said, "I'm unfriending you for this," and uh, relatively intense feedback. And yeah, um, I've gone in and responded to many of the comments. And I also, didn't make the post with an intention to debate or to convince or to argue, but really, the post about those guidelines at the time in California, when I saw the a screenshot, I just thought, wow, look look at what happened. Do people remember doing that? And it turns out people do. And yeah, it's such an amazing. Um, I'm not sure what like. There's a word, like a metaphor of like it's like a kaleidoscope or something, where it's like when you look in and you twist it, you like see different colors. Um, or like different people are looking at the same, remembering the same thing so differently. And so I my intention was not to rage bait, which somebody said in the comments. My intention was not to trigger, not like I wasn't intending to antagonize people who believed in those guidelines. And like I understand, of course, it's very complicated, and there's like a certain sense of like community goodwill that went into trying to do the right thing. So, you know, to some degree, I did step in a hornet's nest inadvertently. But um, I think what's been difficult for me is I've done so much intellectualizing and reading and processing. And it's like I'm deep, 5 years deep into researching, what was going on in our medical scientific world. And like, I was like, okay, like I want to talk about these things. And I don't know how to properly contextualize what I think is like important information for my friends and communities to know. And, because it's so intensely emotional and triggering, um, making a Facebook post with a meme or whatever is like maybe not the best starting point. But, but overall, like, I am on a path to talk about divisive topics and to help, as best I can, explain my perspective, to educate, to hold space for people who are coming to understand, what happened. Some and people who are totally, varying stages of understanding like how the pandemic was orchestrated, how, where COVID came from, where the vaccines came from, where public health guidelines came from. I think a lot of people aren't interested and they want to, move on, which is understandable. Um, I don't want to be forcing it on anyone, but I personally, I feel like there's a lot of different camps out there. There's a lot of people who um, were hurt, were um, negatively impacted by, this overblown government response. Kids in school, missing schools, community gather. Like, I value like community gatherings and singings, and that doesn't count. That didn't count for a lot, and that in some people's calculus, their value calculus, like that doesn't count for a lot. But I think it's actually really important to like maintain healthy communities. That's important to gather. That it's important to see your families and your people. And so, anyways, maybe that is like a particularly potent trigger, like trauma point for people, and so maybe not the best place to start. I don't know. Maybe um, optimistically, like I am wanting to dive into these topics for people who are interested. And so I think, from my perspective, as I, write more about these, as I speak more about these things, I do want to contextualize things as sensitively as I can for people who, who are hearing about totally new information for them, um, to helping them kind of understand where we're at. So, I guess two anecdotes, and I was intending to start this off as like a shorter video for Facebook, but I think maybe I'll put it on YouTube or something. I don't know. So one of the themes in the comments was like, well, some variety of like, show us the evidence, or we can read the studies, and it feels like the framing is just like not so clear as like for what they're like really looking for. Like the topic isn't all that well defined, and there are a number of topics that are interrelated, and it's really about reading from a wide variety of analyses to like broaden your worldview, to like understand processes related to intelligence agencies and government, in, biodefense programs that like many lay people are not aware of. And that's not a criticism, it's just an observation. Um, and so I'm not wanting to argue with people who were personally affected by loss, and who, instinctively were following public health advice, out of goodwill, and were offended by people who um, who were criticizing that advice. And at the same time, I am provoking those people because as I'm pointing out what I think is important information, like it's running into, the assumption that this public health advice was like founded on goodwill. So it is a provocative thing. It's a provocative topic. Some people don't want to go there. That's okay. All right, the two topics I wanted to get to is like, okay, where's a starting place for the people who are interested? Where do you start? Like, you just, and I get that. I'm sensitive to that. I have a whole library, and like it has to, I think it has to be kind of individualized of like, do you really want to read a book? Do you really want to, watch, some documentaries, or like what's your attention span on this? And like, what is your baseline knowledge? Because it's a pretty significant thing to undertake, and I don't think you can really figure it out if you don't have like kind of a substantial, amount of energy and attention to like to look into this. Like if you're hoping that one or two studies, like that I'm going to send you like one or two studies that like substantiate the case, and then you can criticize them and then like be done with the argument, like that's not a very enticing starting place. But a lot of the reading that I did was independent investigators, scientists, researchers, and a lot of their writing was on Substack. And maybe you haven't been on Substack, and that's okay. I'm kind of trying to figure out how I talk about these topics in a way that's accessible for people. So, one of the authors I really liked is Debbie Lerman, and she published this book through the Brownstone Institute, which was founded in 2021. And Brownstone Institute, basically, is founded by Jeffrey Tucker, who lives in Austin, Texas, and is sort of a legal, what are our rights? What do the laws say about our rights? How were our rights violated with some of these public health measures? So that it's like one angle in the conversation. But Debbie, she has a degree in English from Harvard, and she has worked as a science writer for 3 decades. And then she was just trying to figure out what was going on during the pandemic. And of course, because she was investigating it and talking about it, she was faced some backlash for that. And so that, I think some people are not very aware of like how difficult it was for people who were doing the front lines research to have their voice or to make sense of it in the face of active, suppression and censorship. So, she published this book, The Deep State Goes Viral: Pandemic Planning and the COVID Coup. And I just wanted to kind of read a little section on here, which is, kind of the introduction to the book. So, what if the pandemic response was run by national security agencies according to a biodefense counterterrorism playbook rather than by public health agencies according to public health guidelines? And why is it surprising that most countries responded in similar ways? Put simply, if it had been a regular public health response, COVID would not have differed from any of the viral epidemics or pandemics in the last century. The public would have been told to remain calm, wash hands frequently, and stay home if sick. Public health agencies would have tracked clusters of severe disease and treated them accordingly. This would have happened at different times in different locations. Most people would barely have been aware that there was a novel virus circulating among them. Instead, the response to COVID was the exact opposite. The media and public health agencies whipped the population into levels of panic massively disproportionate to the threat actually posed by the virus. Everyone was convinced that the only way to beat the virus was to lock down the whole world and wait for a never before tested or manufactured vaccine. This book presents Debbie Lerman's attempt to understand why and how that switch happened, from a rational, medically, and ethically sound pandemic response to a global, military style lockdown until vaccine nightmare. The ramifications of Lerman's research and analysis extend far beyond the COVID pandemic response, exposing global trends that increasingly affect our everyday lives. This book is not about an event that happened in the past. It is about the shape of what's to come, unless we wake up and stop it. So, for some, depending on where you're coming from, potentially pretty provocative. So, I'm going to end up with one more story and then end this video for now. Thank you for your attention. If you are listening, I appreciate you. And I am open to talking, and I have, limited bandwidth. I don't exactly know how to follow up with everyone. I don't have time to necessarily have all the conversations, but I am open. So, anyways, if you personally are like interested in learning more about this stuff and you want to talk, send me messages and I will try to respond, and I will try to share more resources with you. Or, I'm even open to talking on the phone. I just have to budget my time. So, last story for this video is I was at a Friendsgiving party last night, Thanksgiving, Friendsgiving, and I was talking with an older gentleman, older than me, who really didn't understand very much about, my perspective or where I was coming from. And in the past, we had been talking about Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And basically, this guy was concerned that like Kennedy and like Joseph Ladapo, who's the Surgeon General in Florida, that their kind of brazen, countercultural moves, going against mainstream science, were dangerous, and that, that it's a big problem that diseases that were previously eliminated with vaccines are now potentially coming back. And so he asked me about that, and I engaged with him, and I did the best I could to try to contextualize the conversation, acknowledging that there's so much information to consider and it's hard to know where to start. And like it was hard for me then to like directly respond to his question to without providing a huge amount of background context, because that really feels like the important part of like finding a common understanding is finding the common ground and finding the shared context. And a lot of like the territory that is like foundational for looking at things different is novel to many people. And so last night, uh, I continued thinking about it, and I kind of came up with this metaphor. In Nebraska, where I'm from, like a lot of people love college football, and it's like the newspaper like talks about the football game on Friday, like, oh, how we're gonna do, and then they cover the game on Saturday, and they cover the game on Sunday, and the local news is like, how about the game, Huskers, and everyone like literally in the state of Nebraska is wearing red on Saturdays, and like it's a state religion, cheer for the Huskers, and that's fine. But I was just thinking of this as the metaphor, just like, I don't know if it's a perfect example, but so like instead of talking about um like instead of talking about at the time of the pandemic, COVID, um like I don't know, somehow if like the COVID pandemic is like the football game. I don't know if that makes sense. Or if like, if there's a new case of measles in Florida or Minnesota or wherever, then it's like that's like on the football field. And like there's all this media around the football field, and it's like, oh my gosh, like I hope this, we gotta, we gotta get the measles cases down. We gotta get the COVID cases down. Like I know how this game works. 6 points for a touchdown, 3 points for a field goal. Like go Huskers, like the important thing is to get the important thing is COVID. The important thing is the football game. And so it's like we're like all in this crowd of like 80,000 people watching the football game. We know the rule, we're told, the announcers are telling us what the rules are, then radio's telling us how the game is going. The TV is like telling us about it, the newspaper, like it's all about the football game. It's like the football game is very important. Um, and like, let's say I went to the game with my friend who's like a musical theater person who's like never really cared about football, and it's like I don't really get like what's happening. It's like, okay, it's like they're the red ones, they're fighting against the ones in the other uniforms. And it's like really important that they like try to get that ball into the end zone to get their points or whatever. And they're like, okay, like I can't really tell what's going on, and like it just seems like they all smash into each other and then they blow the whistles. I don't really know what's going on. It's like, well, listen to the radio, like you'll figure it out. Listen to the announcer, like and then everyone's cheering, it's a touchdown, it's exciting. So it's like we're at a football game, all the attention's on the football game, and then there's like this huge storm, and it's like raining, there's like lightning, there's like tornadoes, it's like an weather emergency. And the diehard football fans are like, we play in all conditions, go Big Red, we got it, it's a close game, the game's on the line, like we gotta win the game. But like this is like hypothetical. So I'm there with my friend and we're like, there's lightning, like this is getting dangerous, like there's a tornado warning, like let's go, like let's get out of here. And then so like just imagine that like the like as if in this situation, if the announcers and the TV were like, the most important thing is the game, Huskers is like, ride or die, like we got to win the game. And like the fact that there's like lightning and it's dangerous is like not registering with them at all. And like we're like, oh, like I think there's a problem, like we should go, but like all the fans are like, no, we got to focus on the game. It's like, what are you, like deserters? Are you like fair weather fans? You don't want to stay and watch the game because you're afraid of a little hail. I was like, no, man, like it's kind of bad. Like I think I don't actually like the game isn't as important to me, but like I don't want to die like by a lightning strike or like a tornado. Like I'm gonna go home. And so anyways, like it's a metaphor, but it's just like when Joseph Ladapo, who's like the Surgeon General of Florida, is like making a statement about, like basically saying they're not gonna, in the state of Florida, they're not gonna force vaccines on people. My friend at the party was like, "Oh my gosh, like that's so dangerous because measles is so important," and like it's like it takes a new frame to realize that like where Joseph Ladapo is coming from is like standing against his profession by recognizing that there are harms and dangers with vaccines, and that it is a parent's decision, and that they do have rights that shouldn't be infringed by the government on like what goes into their body. And so, anyways, I don't know if that works for everybody, but like the idea of like the football game, and like the football game being like so important to like all of the media, and then like having a different view of like what's important, and like making a different decision, and like being like way out of sync, and people like being offended and like upset because like you don't care that much about the football game. So hope that makes sense. Thanks for listening. If you made it 20 minutes. I'm still kind of figuring out how to like share my views, but I'm willing to do like video things here or whatever. So I also am working on a show with music. It's going to be at the Center for Performing Arts on December 13th, Saturday night. And I'm planning to like be integrating stories from my experience as a doctor with songs that I find moving. So that show is called Who is Leaf Waterbird? That's all for now. Peace out.